I
Because this is
have
good stuff. This is good
material
talk.
that deals with the bejeweled brain. In fact, I did a class with Dr. Marimba Ani
Oh, yeah.
at Hunter College. She used to invite me to come and do presentations in her college class at Hunter.
Yeah. She wrote Urugu.
Urugu, exactly. And
Yeah,
she
yeah, yeah.
let the circle be unbroken before that. And I did a class on the bejeweled brain, and I did in fact, it was a two-part series. And in your limbic system, in your ventricular system, you have these openings, you know, that eventually were filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Once the Homo erectus stood up, it allowed the brain, it allowed the head to come up, and it brought forward the forehead. When it opened the forehead, it allowed the ventricular system to settle in the midbrain. And it started the choroid plexus, which are bundles of tissue, to produce this cerebrospinal fluid, which began the development. The limbic system is responsible for your feelings. Mm-hmm. Your cerebral cortex, the big part of your brain, is responsible for your thinking. And your R complex, or your brainstem, is responsible for the overall protection of the organism. Mm-hmm. The animal instinct, the reptilian mm-hmm. complex. Mm-hmm. And in the limbic system, you have the lateral ventricles that look like wings of a bird. The third ventricle that joins the two, that comes down, is the third ventricle. And coming down underneath that is the fourth ventricle that goes down into your brainstem. Now, that looks like a bird in flight. Mm-hmm. Okay. The third ventricle is the body, and the fourth ventricle is like the feathers, the tail of the bird. Mm-hmm. We know that our ancestors understood this because they placed on top of the diadems, on top of the head of King Tut, they put a bird with the wings open, the body coming, and it was in perfect proportion to where these parts of the brain were. Mm-hmm. Okay. In your limbic system, you have the bejeweled brain. It's called, Dr. Richard King, the melanist, calls it the vault of initiation. Okay. In the vault of initiation, you have the bejeweled brain. You have the three. That's why the king used to have 3 jewels on his crown. It represented those 3 jewels, which is your pituitary gland, your pineal gland, and your optic thalami. Mm. Your pituitary gland is responsible for your physical growth. Your optic thalami is responsible for your emotional growth. Your pineal gland is responsible for your spiritual growth. Now, go back to the optic thalami. The optic means eye. Thalami is plural for thalamus. We have a left side and a right side thalamus. The optic is where they join. Mm-hmm. And what they have found, that in calcified pineal glands, the emotional aspects of that particular organism depends on how tight that eye is that joins the 2 thalami, or thalamus. Because as it relates to emotions, it is said that your thalamus, being responsible for your emotional growth, sends messages to both sides. And the more intact the eye is, the more smooth, the more Ma'atian the view is going to be of that person's life. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, when you deal with the pineal gland, you're dealing with something, it's called pine, like it's shaped like a pine, like a grape. Mm-hmm. Think of a healthy pineal gland looking like a grape. It's plump, mm-hmm. liquidy, right? When you take that plump grape and put it in the sun dries it, it becomes sun-dried, it becomes a raisin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When the human organism was exposed to the
ice, or if
you
you put it in extreme cold.
Now that is where the other side comes, because that's what happened to us. As African people, in the sun, we received the sunlight, it came to the pineal gland, it bathed our body, cerebrospinal fluid, all parts of our nervous system were touched, intact, promoted. Life was beautiful, life was loving. In the ice, the pineal gland was freeze-dried. Mm-hmm. And that became the calcification. that impacted that person's spiritual growth and a view towards his God and her God. Now, think of this individual. Now, we've had some cold days up in here. Okay. Everybody talking about 15 degrees and 14 degrees and, some talking about -5 degrees.
I was just talking with Sasha about in Chicago, the worst we had was 60 below zero. And I was making it was 60 below zero wind chill factor. I remember the weatherman came on that night and said, if you go from your house to your car, whatever skin is exposed will be frozen immediately. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about the 11,000 years of the ice age that you hit me to. Yeah. That 60 below was a warm day.
That's it.
If we're talking 100, 200 below.
That's it.
And when I was living in Chicago, and I'm gonna let you get back, but I want to tell the story. We don't talk to nobody because it's so cold. Mm-hmm. Our attitudes are different in the winter. Yes. At that level of cold than in the summer when we just sitting there, hey, how you doing? We get on the elevator, we don't look at each other, we don't talk to each other, we look down, we're angry, we're mad. You're in the car, get the F out the way. You gotta move the shovel the snow up. Crazy, you're nuts. I'm thinking of that for 11,000 years and never seeing the sun.
Eggs. Now that was the other piece.
Holy, you know what?
Yeah, because we could have very cold days here and the sun is bright and beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, you're talking about someone who lives under cloud cover all of the days of their existence.
Yes.
Okay.
For generations.
For generations, never seeing the sun.
Yeah.
Cloud cover.
Right.
So that imagine the world that you're going to create. Imagine the world that you see. Imagine your concept of your God and everything else that comes into existence. And when you're looking at, think about when you're cold, go to the relationships. One of the things that I do when I teach my melanin class is that I look at our body systems all come in pairs. Mm-hmm. Your circulatory system and your respiratory system is a pair. Your digestive system and your excretory system is a pair. Your muscular system and your skeletal system is a pair. Think of when it's cold. We tend to hunch up because it's cold. Our muscles just hunch.
And tighten up.
Say again?
And tighten up. Muscles.
Yeah, tighten up. And also the skeletal system is impacted by the muscular system because the muscular system protects the skeletal system and the skeletal system gives the muscular system its stability. Mm-hmm. So imagine that lifestyle that you're living over and over and over again. So I say to our people, what do you expect from them?
Right. Right.
I'm surprised that you're surprised.
Nice. Nice.
What do you expect? What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
What epiphany do you think they're going to experience?
Right.
That they're going to get that kumbaya moment. And I don't mean, and you see, my thing is I'm coming from my heart, Philippe.
Right.
I'm coming from a deep concern and love for the human family.
Right.
Looking at their evolution, their cradle, what Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop calls the zone of confluence.
Yeah, yeah.
You're dealing with an ice age. Zone glaciaire, he called it. That 51st parallel, that Arctic cap on the Earth. Mm-hmm. That goes from the 51st parallel north right up to the North Pole. What do you expect from them?
Right.
What is it that you think is going to happen? Mm-hmm. That is going to be that moment of aha. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that some of them are not thawing out. Mm-hmm. 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 What I'm saying to those that are thawing out, I don't have time to wait for you to thaw out.
Nice. Yes.
As a human
Yes.
person, I love you.
Yeah.
I understand you.
Right.
My heart is with you. I don't have time because our babies are suffering.
That's it. There it is.
Our families are going through changes. I don't have a time for your uncle to get hip to the way the world is.
Right. Right.
So if you'll just excuse me so we can take care of our family.
Yes.
Because I know what you're about.
Right.
It's all up in your genes. It's deep in them. And there's nothing you're going to do about it. And I don't have time to wait for you.
Yes. Yes. I
So
love that. I do not have time to wait for you to unthaw. I love that.
This is my message to them.
I love that.
When you
Love it.
throw out, come on.
Yeah.
I'm ready to party.
Let's dance in the sun.
But I just don't have time right now.
Don't have that
Here's
time.
another thing. Another book to read is Saving Your Skin by Barney Kennett.
Yeah, I got that book. Yeah, man. Yeah.
So, you know, the idea of genetic annihilation, the sun is taking care of them.
Yeah.
See, as black folk, we don't understand, because when we go to get our yearly checkup, for those who are blessed to be able to get that plan where you can get your yearly checkup,
Right.
there's something black folk don't experience that white folk do.
Mm-hmm.
And what white folk, people of less pigmentation, experience is that the doctor tells you strip from head top to shoe stop.
Mm-hmm.
And they cover your body like a fine-tooth comb,
Mm-hmm.
searching for melanomas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is so bad now. This is the way, this is how deep it is. And it's in this book.
And Dr. Wilson talked about it too.
They are now able to pass on the melanoma possibilities to their unborn children.
Right.
There was a time you had to be in the sun.
Right. Now it's epigenetic.
Now it's there in the genes,
Yeah.
because it was something that was in them anyway.
Right. Right.
It was there anyway.
Right.
Just like the possibilities of sickle cell is in all black people. You just got to hope that it don't grow in you. It doesn't masticate, or whatever that word is.
Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't become cancerous.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there by the nature of the gene, the malaria gene, that cell that sickles. It's in all black people. You just got to hope that yours don't materialize.
Right.
The same with melanoma.
Matriculate, I think is the word. Yeah.
It's there.
Right.
And there's nothing you're going to do about it. You got to hope that it doesn't come to fruition with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're dealing with a people who are extremely fragile, because one of the first things that the human being has, because of intellect, reason, and language, there is a fear of survival.
Mm-hmm.
It's in all of us. There are some people.
I'm gonna take it. Can I take it a step further? Because you and I have, like I said, you are responsible for me doing all this research. And you're right. It is a fear of survival. But here's the difference, I believe, and that is, for them, it's not only just a fear of survival; it's a fear of extinction. We have the fear of survival because we have to deal with whatever that is to survive and thrive, whether we're close to the equator or not. But we do not genetically fear our extinction.
Absolutely.
Big difference epigenetically and axiologically.
Absolutely. And that is where I will extend the point I was making. The fear of survival is in the human organism, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you grow up in an ice age, that survival, the observation of death frequently by nature, becomes the extinction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you are, as a whole human organism, in an environment whose job it is to kill you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The ice job.
That's it. There is no other option.
That's its job.
Right.
Ice is meant to kill. Look at nature. Look at the wintertime. Everything dies.
Right. Right.
The function of winter.
Great point. Wow. Good stuff. Yes.
That's its purpose.
Yeah.
That's nature.
Yeah. Not
good. It's not bad. It's not that judgment. It's its purpose. Like the purpose of a wolf is to be a predator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's its purpose. to prey on other organisms. That's its job.
Mm-hmm.
The ice, as we see it, what does it do frequently? What does it do when it comes into your experience? It will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in a house and the heat goes off, the plants are one of the first things to go down. Mm-hmm. They all droop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The cat and the dog head for a place that's warm.
Right. Right.
Okay? And everything tries to move towards the archetype of life, which is warmth.
Right.
This is just the way it is.
Right.
Ice and cold, its job is to kill you.
Now, some people are going to argue about this, and I've seen some of these arguments, which is absolutely asinine because they're not looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint. They're looking at it from a chronological perspective. Now, they're saying, well, what about the Eskimos? The Eskimos have lived in the cold for X amount of blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, the Eskimos get sun. They get sunlight. That's the differentiating factor right there. End of story, actually, as it relates to that. But then we're not talking about the chronological time of Eskimos. We're talking about an evolutionary time frame, which is a lot longer. And evolution is slow. It's a slow growth and a slow pain, depending on what side you look at it. Yeah. But 11,000 years versus 100 years is a big damn difference.
Oh, yeah. And the people that we call...
And like I said, the Eskimos had sun. So that's why they are not the same. In the sense, well, why haven't they lost their pigmentation? Because they get sun.
Absolutely. And also, when you look at Dr. David Imhotep's book about the Skraelings of Scandinavia, they dug holes underground.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that those Skraelings, those black people, were not necessarily, as a wave of people, part of the Ice Age.
Right.
They got caught up in it, but they were not necessarily a part of that generation of the Ice Age to be impacted in
there
that.
Were certain geographical eras that got hit harder and greater, and as a result, the body had to morph and change to adapt.
Absolutely.
As well as the culture and so on and so forth.
And the Inuit were able to eat blubber.
Mm-hmm.
And that provided them with vitamin D. So that it becomes important that, as far as I'm concerned, you can argue with me because I know you're fragile.
Right. Well, how do you argue? See, that's the thing, because what you're saying, it comes from white anthropologists. European anthropologists have already figured this out.
Yes.
Glosier, Allen,
yes.
Bergman.
Yeah. It's there.
European anthropologists have said this is how the human phenotype from everybody knows we all come from Africa, but this is what happens based upon climate. And I had Michael Kilman on recently. He's getting ready to get his PhD. Confirmed the same thing. He says as you move toward and away from the equator, various different climates create and have an impact on the phenotype and the physiology and the biology of the human body, and it adapts to the environment. I don't know if it was you or even him said, there was something about, Asian people. Why do they have slanted eyes? And somebody, I forgot which doctor it was that I was talking to, an expert, but they were saying during a period of time, they were around sand. And when you're around sand and it's blowing, it makes you close your eyes and squint so the sand won't go into your eyes.
Yes.
Well, if you have to live like that every day to travel to and from, these are just things that you sit back and say, well, damn, doesn't that make sense?
Absolutely. And it was the snow of the mountains that was blowing.
Yeah.
And it's Dr. Takano, a Japanese scholar that Dr. Sheikanta Diop, in his book, African Origins, Myth or Reality, quotes Dr. Takano and talks about that fold in the eye that comes from being in a windy area. I can take you to parts of the Sahara. I can take you to the Kalahari Desert. Look at Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
His eyes were squinted. If you look at the Kum people of Southern Africa, one of the original people, You'll notice. And that's because they evolved and grew up around the Kalahari Desert.
Yep.
In the warm climate, you have sand. In the cold climate, you have the snow. And according to where you are, unlike the Kalahari, when you get up into the mountains of Europe, according to how the wind blew in your face, if you were high up in the mountains and the wind blew up, your eyes slant up. If you were where the wind blew directly in your face, your eyes slant back, straight. If you're low and it blows down on you, your eyes slant down. And nature has it that your children and children's children will be born with the least restrictive environment where you don't have to squint.
There you go. There it is. I mean, that's just science. It's not emotional, fam.
Well, see,
it's not emotional.
But they get emotional because of genetic annihilation.
Right. And you know, this is why this is what my goal is with with the virtual Chromatic Wisdom School, is to bring this hardcore level of science that is unequivocal. It's just unequivocal. I don't consider myself an investigative reporter, but I have standards as such, and I don't want to do any BS commentary or interviews or research. I'm trying to figure this stuff out, and I think that I have surrounded myself by the grace of Ma'at and the divine and our ancestors to be surrounded by, my opinion, the most brilliant minds that have ever walked this earth. And when you corroborate all of these different ologies and great minds together, everything fits with Sheikh Anta Diop. Everything fits. Yeah. Everything. There's not one, because as I told you before I said, let me record this. This is great, Cabo, what you're saying. I said this before I started recording you. I said my goal was, from that first interview that I did with you, was to corroborate everything in that interview. And in the last 3 years, I have superseded my expectations on corroboration. Not just from, which it really doesn't matter, but not just from our people, meaning African people, but Europeans as well. So that first show that we did on how Africans turn white and how America is going to turn back brown again, everything in there is unequivocal science. No emotion, just straight science. And this is why I'm so excited about what we're doing together, partnering on this, because the family needs unequivocal information. They need non-emotional information. They don't need debates. They don't need arguments. They need pure, hardcore science and primary research and information where they can go and, as you say, hey, I don't want you to believe a damn thing that I tell you.
That's right.
Right? So now I'm putting you on blast. I'm putting you on speed dial. Go and get the information there, and we list the books. Here's the information where you can go get it. This ain't hyperbole. This is not made up. This is not pseudoscience. This is time-tested, proven. This is the way evolution occurs. And as I've said, based upon everything, you got Dr. Edwin Nichols. Dr. Edwin Nichols has been doing the philosophical aspects of cultural difference for 50 years. Man is almost 80-something years old. 50 years of research in science. Yeah. You can't be messing with Leonard Jeffries. You can't mess with that kind of tenure.
No.
Because that's hardcore research. Axiology. That's so, again, everything, and I don't even know if Dr. Nichols ever read Sheikh Anta Diop's work. I would assume he probably has. But it wasn't germane or necessary in his line of work. However, when he does and talks about the axiological journey of the European, I'd be doggone if it ain't the same damn thing that Dr. Bejeweled said, however many, years ago prior to the arrival of Dr. Nichols.
Absolutely.
It all comes back to the same point.
To the science.
To the science.
To the science.
And it's not emotional. This ain't about religion, who you believe in. It ain't about none of that. None of that. This is just straight science.
Here it is.
And so when Dr. Oyibo came on and said, look, number one, Black people, African people are the smartest people on the planet, and showed the numbers and the data as to why that is. And he didn't have to do that, because we could just look at him and say, well, damn, you were you worked for NASA as a astronaut physicist, building basically helping building nuclear bombs. So you got to have some sense to do that. But to connect Gagu to ancient Africa, the first Africans that walked this planet, understanding the lineage that's in us, and it's all because of one factor: melanin.
That's it.
One factor, one key ingredient: melanin.
That's it.
And he used the analogy, and you've done this too, and I think you did this even again because Oyibo came later in my research. You were one of the first persons in that level of research. And you said something, I'm going to paraphrase it, but you said something in that show about them being like children. And sure enough, years later, Dr. Oyibo, I think in my first interview, but also in the interviews that you and I had with him, he says that they are our children because they're only, 50, 60, maybe 100,000 years of age. We're 3.2 million, right? So they're our children. And he uses the analogy of what happens if a child gets a gun and holds the parent hostage. That's what we're dealing with right now, metaphorically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just absolutely amazing, but it's up to us. It's up to us, each and every one of us, to decide what it is that we're going to do. Are we going to continue the road that we're on, allowing this to happen? Or are we going to take control of our own lives, our families' lives, our community's direction, and begin to because we're in a very unique place right now, because it would be wonderful if we were back in a Ma'atian-based society, but we're not. And so as people who have a certain amount of scientific information, you can't force it on people. So what you have to do is you have to use the art of persuasion, which was my class before this last one that I had on my Facebook Lives, where I dealt with logic and rhetoric. And the importance of understanding, and this is what I used to teach children in language arts. We had different aspects of language art that we taught. For instance, finding the main idea is part of language arts, where we would give the children a paragraph. And what they had to do in reading the paragraph, they had to find the main idea. And we practiced that. Our people have lost some, have forgotten how to find the main idea. Because when you find the main idea, you then can make critical choices as to whether it's logical or it's rhetorical.
It's what Professor Menu Ampem talked about in terms of primary research.
Exactly.
We have to get back to that.
Yes.
And understand how to do it.
Absolutely. And that's what Asa Hilliard talked about. That's what Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop talked about. In fact, that's what is in my Word to the Ancestors as it relates to that chapter that I open up with, where a word from the ancestors, where I'm quoting Dr. Diop. And I'm explaining what he was saying we need to do. We need to create cadres of interested African scholars, interested in pure science as it relates to reversing the rhetorical information that we have now.
Right.
We are experiencing rhetorical information.
Yes.
Rhetoric is based on persuading you. And as we look at number 45 now, the president 45, and we hear him talk, he talks rhetorically.
no question about it.
Okay, it's all rhetoric. What he's attempting to do, oh, there's no collusion. Oh, there's no collusion, because he is trying to plant in your head the words no collusion.
Right.
So that when it comes out, maybe if there was, in your head, you say, oh, no, it can't be. There was no collusion, because he planted the thought rhetorically in your head.
I did the research and in decision theory, and that is called the illusory effect. It's an actual bias. It's called the illusory effect. And what it means is that you have said this, and I forgot who quoted it. It wasn't Hitler. I think it was one of his aides that said, if you tell a lie long enough, the truth becomes unbelievable.
Oh, okay.
That is called the illusory effect. It's what the 45th has mastered.
Yes. And
it's what we have to begin to be able to see, not just in the 45th, but from anyone that you're going to perhaps hold in high esteem or close to you, and they open their mouth and say something.
Yes.
You have to ask yourself, where is that information coming from, and who is giving you that information?
Absolutely. And is it logical?
Right.
Can you walk through a common sense approach to getting to that conclusion?
Right.
Through the scientific method? Or is it something that plays with your emotion as it relates to how you're going to develop your final feeling towards what they said to you?
Correct. And you just said it. You said that when I train children, we kind of have to get back to that mindset, maybe, almost childlike. Find the main idea.
Yes. Yes. Find the main idea.
If you find that main idea, no one can create an illusion for you. No one can lie to you and tell you something and make you believe it, because you're going to find that main idea, and that is the process of logic.
That's right. There are also activities that we do with children where we say, finish the story.
Mm-hmm.
Where we give them a paragraph, but then we have the ... at the end. There's no ending to it. We say to them, okay, now you end the story. How do you think it's going to turn out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then you have to compare and contrast. So there are ways linguistically and through language, and that's what I'm trying to get to in my Facebook Lives. I'm trying to get to the point where, as it relates to educating our community and our children, we have to go back to Ma'at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to get back to that point. We have to move beyond just teaching about Africa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because God knows I'm all about that.
Right, no doubt, no doubt.
But there are other.
But it has to be adaptable, and it has to be able to be applied. In order to that, you have to have other ologies to support that.
That's right. That's exactly what, and that's what I found out as I was developing the curriculum.
Yeah.
The understanding of the brain, and understanding the awesome responsibility that teachers have as change agents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a sacred obligation to my students, no matter what their cultural background was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about the mentality that they had, the way in which the professor that was my supervisor for my thesis on William Leo Hansberry, my first one,
mm-hmm.
I could never treat my student that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have never treated a student that way. I've never spoken to them that way.
Mm-hmm. You
have to be of a certain mentality. Moral exaltation precedes intellectual illumination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No matter how intelligent you may be, your moral code is what drives your intellect.
That's right.
No matter how intelligent you are.
Right. That's right.
And for me, there's a sacred obligation that I have to each and every one of my students. Mm-hmm. Sacred obligation that I have to my children. Mm-hmm. Sacred obligation that I have to those that I come in contact with, yourself included. I have a sacred obligation. This was an African. But when you are an angel living in hell, you have to learn how to act devilish.
Nice.
Because angels don't survive in hell.
They don't. And that's why they say when in Rome, you do what? What the Romans do.
Exactly.
Right. But you keep your integrity intact.
That's
as
right.
you play the game and maneuver within this maze of manipulation.
You put your honor on the back burner.
Right.
And you deal with what's cooking.
Right.
And Malcolm said, speak in the language that you're spoken to.
Yeah.
And that's what he meant. Same way when in Rome, Malcolm said it another way. You speak in the language you spoke. You don't speak Spanish in Germany.
That's right.
You don't speak Italian in Macedonia.
Right. Even Edwin Nichols said, you go to work you go to work white and you come home black.
That's it. And I think his other observation is something that is so very powerful in understanding the axiologies. When you have a person-to-person relationship, you're looking for, like, for instance, when you go into a Chinese restaurant, there's no connection. Mm-hmm. Okay? But that's because their worldview is the person to the group. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They don't have. You don't even really see too much interaction amongst themselves. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And we get very offended. Mm-hmm. You know, we get very, very offended in a lot of ways. Okay, they put money, because some Asian people put money on a table. They don't put money in your hand. They make no physical contact. Mm-hmm. Okay, mm-hmm. We get very offended. We say that that's disrespectful, but to them it's not. Mm-hmm. That's their culture. Mm-hmm. And so we get very offended. With me, I just pick up my change and put it in my pocket and move on.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Go eat that fried rice.
Yeah, that's it. You know, if I go into a Chinese restaurant,
I'm not emotional about it. Yeah.
That's it. If I go into a place where they are, their worldview, and if as African people, we understood people's worldview, then we would save ourselves a lot of the tension and stress that we go through. Yeah. Peoples of European descent, I've said it before, you can have a wonderful conversation with them at work. Talk about your children, talk about work, talk about sports, talk about weather. Oh, it's good. Mm-hmm. Laugh. Mm-hmm. And then at lunch, they'll walk right past you without even speaking to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know they saw you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But according to Dr. Nichols, they objectify you. Mm-hmm. You're an object. You're like the table. You're like the chair. Mm-hmm. So when they see you, they don't say hello to the chair. They don't say hello to the table. Right. They walk past it just like it's an object. Right. So instead of us getting offended that they did not speak to us, I don't care. Right. I didn't want to speak to you.
Right. Right.
So I will objectify you. And when I get back to work, I'll talk to you.
There you go. There you go.
Everything is cool.
If I see you in the street, I have no idea who that is.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know, like what they do when you do jury duty, the lawyer tells you, look, you're going out to lunch. If you see me, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to act like I know you. Right. Because for this case, I cannot act like I know a juror.
That's right.
That's how they are in life.
Right. Right. That's absolutely right.
You see? Right. And so I don't get twisted. It's okay. Because I don't want to be your friend.
Right.
Because I understand your axiology. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some, even of us, pick that same thing up.
Oh, yeah. We pick up those traits. Sure.
We're all tainted by this
infected like vampires. Absolutely.
But you see, my thing is, once we get a sense of how to conduct ourselves, and once we understand other people, then we're in a better position to be able to shape our direction in our own life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why the class that you're going to be teaching for shock metaphysics is about emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. In fact, we're ready to get into that pretty soon.
Yeah.
But this is a wonderful lead-in.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'm going to give this away free to the family.
Oh, yeah.
So that they can see this and understand. This is what these are the conversations that we're going to be having. This is what we're going to be teaching. This is what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And if that excites you, well, come on in. Come on and be a part of it, because honestly, there's no place I think in the world where you're going to be able to have this conversation with all of these ascended masters, in my opinion, these adepts, in one place.
Absolutely.
Without any hyperbole, without any debate, without each other. We ain't calling each other names if we don't agree with something that one said. We're straight about the science, teaching, and giving the family what is needed and necessary for Black liberation, period. That's the only agenda. And it's not even a hidden agenda. It's just in your face. This is it. This
That's
is
right.
black only, for us, by us. It's an African affinity school. Yeah, sure. I'm sure some Europeans can sign up, but you ain't gonna learn nothing because you can't apply it because it's not for you really. Now you can learn about where you come from and what you are. Great, not a problem. But don't expect, any type of personal interaction. This is for us, by us, and our kids need to know true history. And then what is that term you use, Kava? I know I got to let you go. But what's that term you use about, there's a difference between, is it episodic history and another type of history? What is that? Unpack that before we leave.
Episodic and holistic.
Holistic, that's it.
Okay. There is a difference between looking at the world in episodes and looking at the world as a whole experience.
And that's cause and effect. That's metaphysical right there.
It is, because when you understand what led everything to everything that exists in the present, it depends on what happened a step before. Mm-hmm. Nothing happens haphazardly. Mm-hmm. Everything leads to something. Everything that happens in the future is dependent on what happened in the present. Mm-hmm. Everything happened in the present is what happened in the past. Mm-hmm. So that as we view the world around us, I can tell you a change is going to come. It is happening as we
All right, Sam.
That's it. A change is going to come.
Yeah,
my only thing is that I want as many of us to be prepared.
Yes.
For what's coming.
Yes.
And it is our obligation as people who we believe are on that level. We're good doctors. People used to tell me about Khalid Muhammad, how I felt about him. Mm-hmm. I considered Khalid a personal friend of mine. I didn't talk like him. Mm-hmm. The work that I did was not the kind of work that he did. Mm-hmm. But I remember conversations that I had with him and he had with me. He was one of the kindest, softest spoken persons that you want to know. He loved us immensely. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I believe biologically too much. Mm-hmm. Because it entered into his psyche and impacted his life. Mm-hmm. And I believe his brain aneurysm was part of what brought that about. Because I used to always tell him, don't internalize it, Dr. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let it go, man. Let it go. Mm-hmm. I used to tell him, man, I think you might have a brain aneurysm if you keep at this rate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it was his love for us, his consuming love for us. Mm-hmm. That we have to learn to get rid of. We celebrated the birthday of Paulo Freire, a great Brazilian educator. He wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he came and we had a reception for him at Schomburg. And I remember he was asked a question that he had been imprisoned in Brazil. He had been tortured. He had been mistreated. He had been maligned. He had had so many different things. What was it that the night before they had a reception for him, he was dancing and he was eating and he was laughing, he was drinking, he was having fun. And so the question was, what do you have that allowed you to go through all that, yet still at the age of 77, be able to enjoy your life? And he said the change in his life came when he realized that his obligation, all of his work and everything that he did, its purpose was to make it possible to make it possible. Mm-hmm. 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 We get tripped up because we want what we want now. Mm-hmm. We want to make it possible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to make it possible to create the school that we envision for our children and our people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to make it
not about a destination, it's the journey. Exactly.
Yeah. And if we all just keep on that pace, we'll all be able to enjoy life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I find there's too many sad and angry revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Our children are observing that. And they're saying, but you want me to be what you're doing, but you're not happy. Isn't life meant to be enjoyed? And yes, it is. There's a time to be serious, and there's a time to be jovial. Even revolutionaries have to party.
There you go. There you go.
You have to enjoy life, because what is this all for? What is the fight for?
Right.
And I've often asked, what happens to the warrior after the war?
Wow.
Where does he and she fit in the society?
Right.
If they've been warriors all their lives.
Right. I remember that, and I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but there was a scene, I forget, I think it was the last Blade movie, Blade Trinity, where I think it was Ryan Reynolds' character. He says, well, what are you going to do when all the vampires are dead? After you killed all the vampires, you have, what are you going to be? What are you going to do? He didn't have, Blade looked at him with that snarl and that glare. But it's a very good question, right? Metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. And
you do have to begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
And say, okay, what am I going to do, be, and have in the promised land?
Absolutely.
Because I can get caught up in the forest and I ain't gonna ever see what a tree looks like. I'm never gonna admire this tree because I'm in the forest. I'm on the ground fighting, yada, 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 boom, 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 marching. And next thing you know, you're in a box. You done lived your life and you have not enjoyed any aspect of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that is not what we are ascribing to, or subscribing to. That is not the goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves as we move forward, what this is all for. This is for those children yet unborn.
Yep.
And one of the interesting things about the Chromatic legacy is that when you look at the development of the dynasties in particular that come up out of Kush, going back to what I said about to make it possible, what we notice about the Neset Betis, the pharaohs, and the society itself, that the Mene was the first Neset of the first dynasty, but it was those that came up through Kush that made it possible for Mene to become the Neset Beti. There's chaos after the sixth dynasty, and then comes the Middle Kingdom. But the Middle Kingdom was ushered in really by Mentuhotep II. But before Mentuhotep II, you had Intef I, Intef II, and Intef III of the dynasty before the Middle Kingdom. And what brought the Intefs in was Mentuhotep I. When you get to and then they had chaos, and then comes what we call the 18th dynasty, or the New Kingdom, and you have Akmose, who is the first Neset Beti of the 18th dynasty. But it was his grandfather and his father, Senantere Tao and Sekenere Tao, of the end of the 17th dynasty, that ushered in the 18th dynasty and allowed Akmose to take the throne. When you get to the Restoration period, or the 25th dynasty, you really have Shabaka, who is the first Neset Beti of the 25th dynasty. But before Shabaka, you had Shabataka, and you had his brother Pianki. But before Pianki, you had, of the end of the 24th dynasty, you had their father, Kashta. The point that I'm making is that is what Paulo Freire was talking about.
Making it possible for the next generation.
It's, see, what we're doing right now, this ain't for, this is ending this Omen Empire. the vampiristic, cannibalistic empire. You know, I remember Parliament Funkadelics once had an album that said, America eats its young. And I was in high school. Okay, it's parasitic. And so what our job to make it possible, So in the line of all the great Neset Bitiyu, plural for Neset Biti, in that line, in that concept, what we're doing, what the Chromatic Wisdom School is doing, is making it possible for the real school we see down the line, for that next dynasty. We are not the dynasty that we see. We are the dynasty before that's going to end this ma'afa in order to build for our children what they need.
Wow. Thank you.
That's what I see.
Wow. Thank you for that.
And that's what we're doing. Thank you for what you do, Brother Philippe, because together we're going to make this happen, because it ain't over till we win.
Barry Gordy and Smokey Robinson, baby, all the way.
That's right. And I think we got some Rick James coming up.
We got some Rick James and some Diana Ross is in the mix.
Diana Ross will sing something today too.
That's right. We'll hip you to that inside joke a little later on, family. Hotep Professor.
Moortown.
Love that, Moortown. You got it.